Good morning-ish, everyone. It is Tuesday at 10-ish a.m. In Redmond, Washington, so it is time for another .NET API review. Time has passed since the last one, therefore we have more red issues. But currently only one marked for 7.0, so we'll actually get to talk about the future instead of the panic. Alright, first up, add culture name constructors to generated regex 5.9 or 4, 9 or 2. Jose?
All right. Yeah, so for this one, so for 7.0, we did a whole revamp of how culture is handled, particularly how ignored. Culture is really only relevant in regex whenever you are passing in the regex option.ignore case, because then we need the culture so that we can know which mappings to use, because not all the cultures agree on what lowercasing and uppercasing a letter is. Anyways, that's the only context where it matters today. And we used to have a mess before where we would check the culture twice. One would be when you create the regex object. The second one would be an actual match time. So what we used to do is when you created your regex pattern, we would lowercase all the pattern using the culture at that time. And then during match time, we would lowercase all of the input and then see if they matched. But of course, there was nothing guaranteeing that the cultures would be the same during creation time and match time. So all of that generated very unintentional issues. And so we've gotten rid of all of that. We have consistency now. We only care about the culture in the time of creation. And then we kind of like preserve that across the whole lifetime of that regex object. And then that's what's used. So we've made all those changes. All that is in right now. The only interesting bit that we left is when the engine that you're using is generated by the source generator. Because in this case, the way that it works is you pass in, you have the generated regex attribute, you apply it to a method, and then at that point is when we actually create the regex. That's when we read the culture, and that's when we actually care about how to lowercase and uppercase all the characters. But this is happening at build time. And so at runtime, you may have a completely different culture. And now, why does this matter very much? And we want to get it in by 7 is because it's really by design to have the culture that matters to be the build time culture. Because many times you don't even control that. Like, let's say that you're building in a build server, like using ASDO, and you don't really control what culture is present at that point when CSE gets involved for that particular process. So that's why we basically want to revamp this. And so that Stephen wanted to make sure that we had a good story for that too. And the way to do it is to also take in an additional parameter on the generated regex pattern so that you can explicitly say, please use this culture. So that's all of what this is. What this is we're adding 2 different constructors that provide an additional parameter, which is the culture name that you want to use for us to make those translations.
So just to be clear, does it mean you interpret the culture at build time? So basically, let's say there is a difference in the, culture tables at runtime. Those are no longer read. You basically read ENUS at build time?
Correct. That's how it works today already. The difference in here is now that you get to be explicit about which one gets used, as opposed to us just the reason why this happens, in case you want context, is because we make at creation time, we make some optimizations on the pattern so that we can search more efficiently. We can use vectorized search. So for example, if your pattern is just a lowercase a, or like ABC, for example, the string ABC, all lowercase, what we do is we take that and then we transform that, and we see the regex options that ignore case. Then we transform that to a set of uppercase a, lowercase a, concatenated by a set of like lowercase b and uppercase b, and then lowercase c and uppercase c. So then we have a pattern that no longer is ignore case. We kind of like turn that flag off because we've translated the pattern into an equivalent one that is enabled. Like it's way more performant. We can do vectorized searches over it and all that. So this translation happens at build time. So at build time, we need to know which lowercase and uppercase mappings we need to use. That's why that's happening already today. The only difference that this is adding is now you get to choose which mappings get used, as opposed to just them getting defaulted by whichever culture the Wasm process is running in.
Okay, so I think that answers my other question. So there's no need to have like specialized, like, invariant or current.
We already have, so regex options have a regex options dot culture invariant. If you set that regex options culture invariant, and then you also pass in a culture name, we are throwing. Like I already have this implemented in a draft PR, and the way that we implemented that is we're throwing, because then there's an explicit conflict where you're both saying, hey, I want it to be an invariant culture, but then you're also passing a culture name like NUS. So at that point we throw, and we just say, hey, you have an invalid generated regex attribute.
Presumably by throwing, you mean you generate a diagnostic at build time, right?
Correct.
Yeah, okay.
And
yes.
Are you similarly failing if someone has asked for FRFR, but they happen to be running on a machine that was built with the special no cultures, no ICU build? AKA, you ask for the culture and there's no culture?
So I didn't test actually that case. The way that this is implemented is really just wrapping a call to culture info dot get culture, and it passes in the string that you put it as a parameter. And if we if we catch an exception of culture info not found, then we just emit a diagnostic and we say, hey, we couldn't find the culture that you're trying to load. I think that what you're saying, that setting of like basically disabling like ICU and disabling all of the cultures, I think it's called globalization dot invariant or something like that. If you do that, you would do it on the runtime app. We are talking about compile time here, so I doubt that the compiler server will ever set that.
No, well,
I may be wrong.
it's I think our default for Docker containers. So if you had a Docker container building your
I see.
pipeline, then you would hit that. So it is an important thing to test.
I see. Okay, I'll definitely test that. Sure.
Just to make sure that we don't return culture objects that just have null, sort of neutral data in them, just because, like, it looks like a culture string. And if it does, then ask Tarek
we
what
would
to do.
emit a diagnostic. Like at that point, we would. I think I'll make sure, but we would emit a diagnostic at build time and say, hey, we couldn't find the culture that you're trying to use.
Right. And so the existing constructors, are those are current culture, or are those invariant? Because you said invariant was a flag, so the existing ones are whatever current culture is in the compiler?
Well, so before the PR that I have, the way that it works is if you pass culture invariant, we use invariant culture. If you don't pass culture invariant, we just default to whatever culture is on the CSC process. That's how it used to work. After my PR, Stephen asked us to change that, and also Jared asked us to change that. And now all the three constructors will just default to invariant always. The reason is we want to have builds that are reproducible no matter where you build in the world. So now we've switched the other three to default to invariant. Plus we have these two where you can explicitly pick a different one.
Okay, so in generated regex options, that invariant culture is redundant at best and causes you to fail at worst. You basically have no reason to set it.
Correct.
Okay. All right, so the only question I have about the shape is the cascade and the potential use of optional parameters, but I don't know. I'm feeling lazy, so I'm fine with it.
Okay. The only reason why we have two is because there's this whole other thing that I think we've talked about before as well, but passing in match timeout milliseconds or not passing it, like there's a difference in it. Like it's not the same to say I want infinite match timeout specifically and saying it than just defaulting. Like the default is already infinite, but there's a difference in those two. So it matters whether or not you pass in match timeout milliseconds. So that's why we have two different constructors: one where you don't pass it, one where you do pass it.
Any feedback?
I really dislike that we have to use ints here, but I don't know what else to do.
You want to be able to what? Sorry.
No, I just like that we have to use ints, but that's just the limitation of the constructors.
Yeah. Oh, right.
And we already shipped that one.
Yeah. We haven't shipped it.
Okay, it's not part of this proposal.
But it's not part of this proposal. Yeah. Yeah, we can't. So the actual regex constructors, those take time span, but yeah, this thing can't take a time span.
Yeah. But attributes for you. Which namespace is this guy in?
Oh, yeah.
I think it's system text regular expressions, I would guess.
Yep. System text dot regular expressions.
Um,
Boom.
oh yeah. All right.
Thank you so much, folks.
So since nobody responded back, I assume that is the last one for 7. Or was Levi bringing something for 7?
Well, he said he's bringing something, but it's not here and it's not read, and he's not, so maybe it'll show up in a bit. All right. Trim friendly font, to log font, and from log font 70358. And I'm echoing from emo?
No, not from me, from Jeremy, I think. Because if you wear headphones, you can't echo.
Ah, fair enough. Jeremy?
Sorry.
No worries. We added to
Jeremy?
the list.
So we are. This is pretty simple. Just as it stands, we have one that takes object, I believe. So let me go back to font. I meant to have that up.
So I think my main question was, why are we taking a T and not just exposing the log font struct directly and telling people to use that?
Because we typically have, well, as of yet, we haven't done that. We could. It's awkward because of the fixed car thing in it. You know, generally speaking, the other part of this is like people already have existing definitions that they're pulling in from other libraries and stuff that have interop stuff, and that avoids them having to transcast it to the other thing, right? Do the and whatever else.
Right, but we expect it to match the actual signature anyways.
Sure.
And so basically it's just forcing them to define their own log font struct that is bitwise compatible with the actual raw native definition. And so I think we should just expose that and tell people to unsafe as.
It was already the case though too. I mean, that's the case with the object one, is that it had to be the same thing. So, well, it's not exactly true. We actually supported the older version, which was a class, but if you wanted to put your own arbitrary thing in, you could do it with that. Because we use the Marshall class to see what size the incoming thing would be, and if it happens to be the exact same size on the other end of it, presuming it's not an unmanaged struct type of thing, not blittable, then we have the marshaller convert it on the object one over to the right thing. Just presume it's going to work. But I don't know. That was my only thing with it, is that we just haven't put that out there yet where we've exposed any of these things, and then that sort of opens the door for like, why don't you have all the other stuff defined?
Yeah, my general thought.
I don't have a strong opinion one way or the other, but
my general thought is that it simplifies things overall if we just call this to log font unsafe and from log font unsafe, and we expose the actual log font interop struct. That avoids users needing to duplicate the same type signature everywhere. It makes it clear that it's the actual interop signature, and makes it clear that it's designed for and around perf scenarios, where you don't want to deal with boxing allocations or the complexities of the object overload.
Yeah, this is more about trimming. But
What's your implementation on this gonna look? Because you don't know anything about the T, so you must just be basically turning it into a byte star and blitting.
yeah, basically. I mean, we check the size of it, of course, but that's the as we do in the other one to make sure it's the right thing. But like I said, either way, I don't care. I mean, I'm not gonna. I do care what we do, but like, I'm fine with the pluses and minuses of either.
Well,
It's just if we expose it, the only thing I would say is that if we do expose the log fun thing, I would want to expose it exactly the way it is in the Windows code, because like not make up names for things to like C sharpish or .NETify it, right? Like we've done for the other things. I want it to be pretty explicit that it's a native thing.
yeah, I mean, my real concern is we generally say don't use in public API because it causes a massive hand wave here, more harm than good.
In does?
Yeah, but if you're basically using it and then you just as ref to get the pointer and move on with life, I think that avoids the place where you look at it as, oh, this avoids copies, and then it turns out that you actually made like 17 copies inside your implementation. So this might be fine.
Do we have a link on that somewhere? I'd like to read up more about that.
Well, in the 3rd edition of Framework Design Guidelines, which I think you have a copy of, it says do not use
yes,
in public
API.
API.
Right next to me. So it's all right. Good. I didn't know that was in there.
Yeah, the issue is potential
I've got it handy.
pitfalls around hidden copies when you have a mutable struct, as well as the fact that in allows R values rather than requiring them to be L values, which for some API surface is desirable and for others it's not. There is a champion proposal for adding ref read only parameters, which would require it be an L value. Which would help solve some of that.
Oh, cool.
But
Good to know.
Yeah.
So I'm fine with it not being in. I mean, that's totally okay. And I leave it up to the review board's wisdom as to whether they want to do T or actually expose a log font.
I think whether we do T or expose the log font, and I do personally have a leaning towards just expose log font, I think it should be called unsafe to make it very clear that under the covers it's doing bit blitting, and if you're doing the wrong thing, then wrong things will happen.
But
Well,
that's what the current implementation's already doing, right?
Right, but that's,
Yep.
It's 15 years too late to give the guidance of maybe we should have called this unsafe because it's doing unsafe things.
Well, but then you'd have to log font and to log font unsafe. They're equally unsafe,
Yep.
but one of them now looks safer. So I don't think we should use different names.
I mean, if we're taking log font and defining it, then it is safe, because we'd just be passing the pointer of it. But we would need to expose the face name.
And I think exposing the log font and exposing the fixed char array is better. Notably, something we could do is we could define it, keep it private, and .NET 7 has this fancy feature called unscoped ref, which means that instead of exposing the private fixed char LF base name field, you can expose a public span of char, and it's provided it's
Sure.
annotated with unscoped ref, then it becomes safe and properly tracked lifetime.
Okay. I haven't
Alternatively,
used
it
the new
could be.
feature, but like,
Go ahead.
I mean, I've done the span thing, just not with that new feature yet, with internal definitions to make it easier to deal with the that thing. But what was your follow-up alternative?
I mean, it could be a private field, which still makes the struct unsafe, but then it could be exposed via a public string property. So the set would just fail if it's too big, and the get would
do, because then there's a perf issue with that for us, right?
fair enough.
Just a comment on that. If you did want it to be a string, probably want it to be a packet, that
So-
is not possible because it's the point change.
You sound like
You sound like
you're talking through a towel in a tunnel, Levi.
excellent. I will switch headphones.
Yeah, I did not hear anything.
Well, nothing semantic. All right, so if we want to define log font, where do we want to put it? System drawing? System drawing in some child namespace thereof?
I mean, I just checked earlier, like we already have the convention where we have an interop namespace. So we have system windows.interop, for example. So we could just go with system.drawing.interop and put the, whatever you want to call my log font in there.
And I wouldn't call it my log font. I would just call it log font and match
Yeah.
the Windows naming for everything
Yeah.
to be super explicit that that's what it is. But
That seems reasonable to me.
I mean, we'd take off all the LFs, but
Well, even that I wouldn't care for because it's in the interop namespace. So I think matching Win32 would be not unreasonable, I guess.
Yeah, that's my thought.
and that's what I'd prefer.
fair enough, I guess.
I mean,
I did give a link in chat, or sorry, sample in chat showing the valid code to expose the fixed char array safely without exposing the raw pointers.
And the other small caveat is that there are actually two of these, but I wouldn't call this log font W, which is actually what this is. I just call it log font. Because there is never a need, never will be, for us to expose.
All right, are we calling it all caps log font, even though the method that you pass it to uses Pascal case log font?
If it's not obvious, it's logical font.
I mean, if you look at system windows.interop, we have a type in there called MSG, all caps, and it basically has the Win32 naming conventions for property for I think it's properties actually as well. I'm not sure why they went with properties here, but that's what they did.
Okay, I'll just doodle on a shared screen. Of course, that does
that works
something
for me.
different.
You're gonna remove the in, right?
Yeah, I mean, presumably you want pointer fastness, so is there a reason to not make it ref? Do you expect to be calling it from a read-only context?
Is there a performance difference between ref and in?
There's no performance difference. It's just if it's a, for example, a cache static read-only or something, then using ref will require a copy, using in won't. This is a case where it being an L value or an R value doesn't matter. And since it exposes, since it doesn't expose any kind of interesting, since the function's not going to actually consume it in a mutable way, and never will, in is theoretically fine for this API.
I mean,
I'm not sure I understood what you just
it
said. Does it mean there is a benefit of using in because it would actually avoid copies?
Yeah, it would avoid a copy if you had a if for example you cached a static read-only log font. Let's say you wanted to initialize one once and then use it in all of your functions. Then in would avoid the copy.
and as long as the implementation doesn't call this guy, which somewhere we can put the word read-only here. Do we have to turn this into non?
No, it's explicitly mutable because users accessing the log font will want to set the value of LF face name. It exposes an ability to mutate the struct, and therefore it is mutable.
Well, but you can be a read-only struct and have a mutable collection property. It's that the struct itself doesn't need to be cloned.
This is returning a direct span over
yep.
the contents of the struct.
Fair enough. Yep. Yes, that would destroy the next caller.
LFA size public.
Does that mean that we actually need, like, can everyone hear me better, by the way?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Does that mean that we actually need a read-only equivalent to this? Like, if you are taking it via in, or do we just expect you to make a clone?
So in C and C++, you could expose both a span and a read-only span returning 1, and it would pick the correct overload based on whether you're mutating or not, and whether the target is const or not. But we don't have that in C#. So we'd have to either expose some other property, LFAce name read-only or something.
I see. So maybe then the answer is we don't do anything for now, force you to make a copy if it comes as in, and then like petition the language team to add a feature that lets us have a const modifier.
Yeah, because in practice, if in practice it should be fine. It's really only no, I guess if you have the static read only and then you want to access LFA name and see what its value is, it would always copy. So yeah.
Sorry, I think I'm missing this. Like, where would the copy happen, or when would the copy being made?
So not in any code that's visible on the screen, but if a user cached in a static read only and then they wanted to directly access LFA name rather than only using this as a from log font and then accessing the relevant data through the font type that gets returned. If they wanted directly access LFA name, that would then copy.
So if log font is a static property somewhere, then accessing its LFA name property would cause a copy of the containing struct.
Yeah.
No, if it's a static read-only, then accessing LFA name would cause a copy to happen.
And you could fix that by exposing public read-only span LFA name read-only.
Gotcha.
But that's basically the only way, since C# doesn't allow outside of casting overload by return type. The alternative would be to expose the fixed char field directly, and then that requires users who want it to use unsafe code, but it then becomes read-only if they're not mutating. So no copies.
Yeah, I mean, if you really wanted to, I don't think there's a it would be bad to make LFA's name public. We could have LFA's name data or LFA's name field or something and have that public, and then just say if you want to do this, you still can. You just have to be an unsafe code. If you want to remain safe, then just use LFA's name and all it good. I mean, this is for interop anyway, right? So I think like having any guardrails here seems not particularly useful, but I like being safe if we can be safe. So I mean, Jeremy should comment on this, but I don't think that caching the log font as a static read-only somewhere makes a lot of sense.
Well, if that's the case, then we don't need a read-only span property at all.
Well, it would just be, I mean, so the way I assume this type would be used is somebody news up a log font in a local variable, and then they just say local variable.lface name, and then they just write whatever data they want to write into that, right? And
Yeah,
they
and
don't have to
that'll-
use safe. They don't have to do anything unsafe to do that, right? All they have to do is like string.copy to log font.lface name, right?
Yeah, and that should work just fine. I mean, they would need to set the null terminator, I assume, but whatever.
That's a good point. Yeah, I don't know how this works.
I mean, there are complications here that would prevent us from doing a really nice API around it, but whatever. It's like you said, it's interop. Who cares? Like we make it possible and relatively straightforward.
Yeah, maybe the answer is expose it like this, and if users happen to come forward with scenarios, consider exposing LFace name read only or something, or LFace name field. Either one would work.
Right.
Yeah. That seems reasonable.
That's my vote.
That seems
The only question I have here is, do we expose the LF face size const?
I don't think we need to. They can do LFace name dot length, and the JIT will treat that as a constant.
Okay.
The JIT has special recognition for create span, where the length given is a constant, so should all be fine.
The
The only thing is like we have a method called toLogFont. Do we like the naming convention? I mean, it writes to the log, right? To the supplied font, right?
Yeah, it's converting a font to a log font.
yeah, it matches. Thanks, browser. This guy, which is void and writes to a destination object.
Ah, okay. Yeah, in that case. And let's just keep the existing naming convention.
So two questions on that front. One, does the API actually need it to be a ref? Does it read it at all, or should this be out? And if it's out, and even if it's not, should it be graphics as the first parameter on the first function, and then ref or out log font as the last parameter?
Yeah, I guess that depends on how you want the IntelliSense to look like, right?
I mean, switching to the other overload, our general rule is don't move things in overloads. If they're the same thing, they should be in the same slot.
Right, unless it's out, in which case they go at the end. In which case, that's why I'm asking, is this functionally an out? And so out, since it's still by ref internally, would work and would help elaborate. You don't need to initialize this first.
I mean, I agree with you, and if there would be a completely new overload group, but given that we reuse the existing names and the existing names log font goes first in both overloads, I would keep that here as well. We can still make it out. I mean, I don't think, like, if we don't need to read it, it makes sense to make it out.
Yeah, this one's a API convention and not a compiler rule, so I think we should just take the current overload and fix it for a struct, which means that there's an out in a weird place, but it's interop, so.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
And then, yeah, the pitfalls of in the from log font, assuming that the implementation just goes like, cool, you're a pointer, and just passes it down, then it'll avoid the performance problems. I assume field reads are fine because the compiler knows a field read has no side effects. But
Exactly.
But the property read would be dangerous.
Yep.
That in our implementation, though, we would just basically const cast it away, and it should be just fine.
Well,
in
I
our
was
implementation,
thinking the
we
implementation
don't
is just
need-
going to pass it straight through to a p invoke.
Yeah, it's just pin
Yeah.
log font and then pass through to p invoke, or don't pin and we can access the internal field. We have multiple options if it actually needs the draw access.
Yeah. That should be easy.
So yeah, we could have that other thing, just not as a public API, just have it internal. So the other read-only span one, if we end up needing that, right?
Yeah. All right.
Sorry, remind me why to-log font, the last overload, takes an out parameter as opposed to just returning the log font?
Because there's an existing one that takes an object destination.
Okay, got it.
So we're just turning object log font into out log font log font.
Sounds good.
All right. That's really the gist of what we did. So, final comments?
I'm good.
Yeah.
Boom. Thank you, Jeremy. All right. Still no
So
7.0 items.
73636.
I haven't you marked it yet.
Is it a 2 of A token or is it an issue?
It's an issue.
All right. What's the number?
73636. Could be marked 70. Hey.
Yeah,
there
we
we
didn't
go.
mark it ready for review. So.
Oh, whatever. I'll get the next one marked ready for review. Anyway, so this is a proposal. I know we're coming in really hot before the RC1 snap. This is a proposal to obsolete the XML secure resolver type. This type was originally part of .NET Framework, and it uses the code access security CAS sandbox in order to restrict what operations can take place while the XML secure resolver is on the stack. So this would be things like if a style sheet, if an XSLT is coming from the internet. Oh my god, I completely forgot the terminology here. Basically, if an XSLT has a mark of the web, for instance, then the XML secure resolver will see that and say, oh, you can only access very specific resources when doing resolution. None of that turns out exists in .NET Core. Like, we removed the CAS sandbox, we removed evidence, we removed all that stuff, which means that on .NET Core and later, the XML secure resolver just kind of no-ops. It basically just says, you know what, I'm not going to set up a sandbox, I'm just going to let everything go. And this is not good because people are relying on this for the security promises that it makes. Basically, it was ported incorrectly. It should have been ported as a fail safe, but it was instead ported as a fail dangerous. So this proposal says we obsolete it, and in the obsolete message we say, like, hey, you should use this other thing instead, and I'll open up an issue on that shortly. And we change the implementation to throw XML exception. Basically, the implementation would unconditionally throw an exception. This type would basically be a dead end going forward. That is the issue here.
So there would be logically equivalent to the, and also decision-wise consistent with the other attributes we had in CAS, where things that are basically safe, they just know up, and things that do something like this, where they basically make guarantees. I think it was the principle related things, right, where you have to be in a certain
Correct.
user group or whatever. We made those throw by default.
Yes, so in particular, you're right. The method equivalent that this is calling is some permission dot permit only, and because we can't set up a sandbox, we changed the permit only method in .NET Core to always throw an exception unconditionally, because it literally can never fulfill its guarantee.
Right.
The problem is when this type was ported from .NET Framework to .NET Core, permit only threw an exception, and when we ported it, what we did is we simply commented out that line rather than simply say, oh, maybe this type shouldn't have been ported ever in the first place.
Yeah.
So that was a mistake on our part during port. So this is an attempt to correct that mistake. The reason I chose XML exception instead of security exception is there is a built-in internal type called the XML null resolver, which is basically what this does now. And that type historically has thrown an XML exception. This is attempting to do the same thing just as a compat thing.
And remind me, in order for people to use the type, they have to instantiate this type, right? Or is there a factory method somewhere that they go through?
There's a constructor on this type. It's listed here.
Yeah, so they generally would have to use the type directly, basically, right?
Correct. You would instantiate it directly. That second parameter is what's used to set up the evidence-based sandbox. If you specify null, then the sandbox comes from, I think it's supposed to come from the whatever trust domain the caller was in, which again, like, could have the mark of the web on it. It's weird.
Right. But the reason I'm asking for whether people use it directly is to basically assert whether I can use the usage information that I have, which is like 0.8% on the Compat Lab and 0.1% on NuGet. So the usage is, very low, very fringe. So I think obsoleting it and throwing seems a completely reasonable thing to do.
Yes, I agree.
How mechanical is the workaround? Like, is there basically an XML insecure resolver, or like, I have no idea.
I mean, there is, so if you didn't want any restrictions whatsoever, there is a type called XML URL resolver, which is kind of the default resolver for everything, and that has no restrictions whatsoever. If you wanted something that was fully restrictive, then we can talk about that in the next issue that we're going to discuss.
I guess the second thing, and this isn't really an API question, but assume that I did have some dependency I didn't control that called this, and I wanted to upgrade. Like, would there be an out context switch or something to be like,
No.
I know it's not.
No,
secure.
there is no switch. It's blocked.
Okay.
Like, it is so fundamentally dangerous. We just blocked it.
Yeah, I mean, for things that are like that fringe, I'm okay with doing that. I think if this would have been 30% usage or something, I would have said, okay, we probably need some compat switch for that. But if the usage is that low and the API is that bad, it seems very reasonable for me to just say, sorry, we messed up. And
Yeah.
if you haven't been bitten by it yet, you will. And now we just end this type.
Yeah, the thing is, like, a compat switch still wouldn't be the right solution anyway, because if you're using this type, you're doing it for a reason. And the compat switch would put it back into the old behavior of we're still doing the wrong thing. Like, that's,
Yeah,
you need to make a code change if you were calling this type. That's what it comes down to.
I think they're kind
Well,
of
it's on
similar
you
to.
if we have to patch it. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like if you look at binary formatter, right? Like it's kind of like we know that the problems are with it, right? But moving away from it might be non-trivial.
Yes.
If it's encoded, you don't own, right? And I think that might be here similar. Like, I mean, you can argue that the translation is mechanical. You just go from XML secure resolver to XML URL resolver, or you basically extend your own version of XML resolver.
So
check
let
the
me
domains or
interrupt
something
you
like
real
that.
fast, because I think that's a bad analogy. I think the better analogy would have been there are cases where binary formatter does not cross a trust domain, like you're cloning an object, for instance, within your application, or you trust both endpoints.
Right.
The very specific use case here is that you're crossing a trust domain. There's literally no reason other than that you would use this API. So the analogy would be you set up binary formatter, you set up a a binder inside binary formatter because people use that in order to, provide some type of security context. And then we tell people, oh, by the way, like you can't, we're not even going to honor whatever binder you put in. Like the entire reason that you would do that in the first place is to work around what you perceive to be an issue. Like us falling back to the old behavior serves nobody any purpose. So even if there were 30% usage, I would very strongly argue for not having to switch anyway. Like your switch is stay on .NET 6 or go back to full framework.
Patch Tuesday's live, right, Levi?
Yes, it is live.
Yeah, this type doesn't work in 6 anyway, so.
No,
as
it
of
does, actually.
As of this morning.
Yeah, this type actually still works in 6.
What?
We didn't change the implementation of this type.
Oh, we made a copy.
We changed all the callers of this type.
All right.
To no longer use it.
Fair enough.
Because we thought that changing it in an in-place update would break, potentially break people.
Fair
so
enough.
We're doing it in a major version instead.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah,
So
that seems reasonable.
the only question I have is the normal question with obsolete is: do we want to put it on the type, which makes any methods that take one have to suppress the obsolete, or do we want to put it on the constructor and only stop people who built it?
I would honestly put it on the type because you don't want people to use the type period, right? Even as a pass-through.
Okay.
I don't want people to subclass it or anything else.
Fair
either.
enough. So,
Yeah.
Public API, if it took it, it takes it, and it'll just have to suppress it. But
That's fine.
I mean,
if you obsolete the public API, then that'll also suppress the warning.
fair enough.
Right. I think that the mental model I would have is when you're obsoleting a method, you're really obsoleting an operation, right? Versus if you're obsoleting a type, you're really obsoleting a concept, right? I mean, it's not always true, but that's basically how types work, right? They're meant to be nouns because they're meant to represent a concept, right? And what we're really deprecating here is basically the idea that we sandbox any XML resolution, right? So we should obsolete the type.
Okay.
By the way, Jeremy, to your point, one of the things that we did is for some of the CAS attributes, we obsoleted the attributes, the types themselves as warning, and we obsoleted the constructors as error. And the reason we did that was so that if you applied it as an attribute, it would actually cause a compilation failure. But we still wanted you to be able to do things like type of blah, so that you could inspect it, using reflection APIs.
Fair enough.
Sure.
But that type, like principal permission attribute, for example, was so fundamentally dangerous, we actually went straight to error. We skipped warning. Like that's how badly we wanted to kill it.
All right. So looks good as proposed.
Yep.
And you'll see the other issue that I opened when you refresh the review page. And this next issue is going to speak to Stefan's question. So the next question is, how do you actually explicitly say I want to forbid resolution from an XML resolver? And the way that you would do it going forward is we just put a null resolver static property on the XML resolver base class. Like if you access that, that gives you a resolver that just, again, unconditionally throws. And it's not obsolete, so you don't have to suppress anything. So for instance, in .NET, in the patch that we put out for .NET 6, we introduced this as an internal concept, and then we redirected all of our callers to it. In .NET 7, we would simply make it public.
I like the idea. I like the concept. I'm not sure about the name, but I'm also struggling with coming up with a better one.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
I have that under risks as well.
I was thinking null stream, and null stream would never throw. But I guess if you're a null resolver, what's the concept of null? I guess if that's the only way to return nothing.
So there is actually an interesting behavior. A lot of the APIs right now, if you literally say null for their XML resolver property, a lot of them will simply, if they're asked to resolve something, will return an empty string. They'll say I resolved it, and the answer is empty. This is different in that if this is asked to resolve something, it will actually throw an exception and say this operation is straight up forbidden. Yeah. The name internally was already null resolver, so that's why, make this public, but I'm good with changing the name. We could also say something like forbidden resolver, but that maybe gives it, a little too much mystery around it.
Yeah, null resolver, non-resolver, blocking resolver, failing resolver.
I like failing or even throwing resolver over null resolver probably.
We have some precedent for this. Give me just a minute.
Because you mentioned like a null logger, and to me, I assume that is a valid instance that does nothing. I have no idea what a null file provider would do.
Basically,
So-
always say the file doesn't exist.
In system text, we have encoder fallback and decoder fallback, and they both have, those are abstract classes, and they both have static property accelerators on them called exception fallback. And the fallback behavior there literally is throw an exception if any of its methods are called. So this, like following that as precedent, this would be called exception resolver. It doesn't actually resolve exceptions, it throws an exception if asked to resolve.
Yeah, that's kind of the problem with anything suffix with resolver.
I mean, so we could, use the gerund and just call it throwing.
That's my vote right now.
I mean,
I'm
throwing
totally fine
resolver
with
is
that.
actually nice. Yeah, that's. I think I like that.
And it would throw XML exception with an error message. Like we could also change the error message to like show, what entity it was asked to look up, blah 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 if we need to.
You asked for this. You got it. I mean, in a sense, the throwing resolver is the most secure resolver.
It is. The interesting point here is that it would only throw if it's actually asked to do any type of resolution. Simply assigning it as the XML resolver property won't fail.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's
Yeah.
what I would expect. I mean,
Yeah.
And like, out of curiosity, is the instance actually secure XML resolver, or do we have a custom derivative of that?
It's a custom derivative.
Because that would be funny in the debugger.
Yeah, it is its own custom thing. Actually, XML Secure Resolver wraps this as an implementation detail in the patch that I have.
It's this guy, XML null resolver.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could rename it actually, right? XML throwing resolver now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That would be probably nice. But yeah, anyway, doesn't
Yeah.
really matter.
Yeah. This intro
Slightly
type
bigger
goes
diff.
away once we make the property public.
All right.
And now you all can tell me how good my background noise cancellation is on these headphones.
Well, it's better than what you had before because Jeremy's description was accurate.
You really
yeah.
set up the stage nicely for these new headphones. If you're like, does it sound
Yes.
better than these other ones?
Yeah, Suppose needs to be paying me money to show them on stream.
Yeah, I feel that Pepsi owes me money for the amount of Diet Mountain Dew that I drink on the
So
stream.
what I do appreciate just now is because it was out of focus of the camera, when you held it up, it was blurred.
It's like
Because our stream is sponsored by Coke, not Pepsi.
They
then
missed
I'll
their
pick up the
payment.
other can.
So there we go. And that one actually was not blurred. So excellent.
There was this movie where people were always telling the truth, and they had this ad on TV that says Pepsi when Coke isn't available.
First, I thought you were going to talk about Wayne's World.
All right.
No, it was I think The Invention of Lying, I think is the name of the movie. Quite good actually.
So are we all good here?
I think so.
All right. I won't actually be able to get the PR ready until later today, because I need to run to a gate. But yeah, thank you. That's all I had, just those two.
Have fun. Don't melt.
Thank you.
All right. And now we're back to not having red issues. All right. Collection and observable collection do not support ranges 18087. That's a low number.
Yes, Eric on the call, because I don't understand. I think we approved it already, and then the only reason why we moved it back was because it broke all of WPF. And then we said maybe we can do something about the API, but I don't know what the current shape is, because what you see right now, right on screen, I think is the thing we approved originally. So I don't quite understand what the... Like, I tried to read the commentary yesterday, but it didn't make much sense to me. So if Eric isn't here, I would just skip it. Because I think he has to talk to it.
Okay, I'm just looking for a approved note on a different screen.
And the other problem is this thing has
344 hidden items? Okay.
Yeah, there's like, this is one of those hot button subjects because we approved it like, 2016, right? And we keep not fixing WPF, so people are somewhat upset with us, which I understand. And so, yeah. So unless we know what we're gonna do here, we shouldn't touch the issue, I think.
Yep. I know Christoph's not here. I don't think Laomi's here, and I don't think Eric's here. So, bloop.
Yeah.
Add snake case support to system text JSON number 782. All right, that's a low number.
Yeah, I think somebody pinged me from JSON. I forgot who it was, but basically nobody from JSON is in today either. So.
Yeah.
How did we get 782 for an issue opened in 2019? Whatever.
That's a really interesting question.
I know I can just Google this, but what's kebab case?
It's the one where you have the dash in the middle.
Yeah. Move the snake up to the middle, so you've skewered the words.
Yep. You didn't know? I think that's
apparently.
I think it's the Ruby naming convention. I think they allow dashes in names, I think. That's what all of GitHub does. Just by talking to GitHub with JSON, with system text.json is no fun.
So, I mean, Christoph commented in chat that it looks good to him, which means that they're, in theory, at least willing. I mean, they marked it as ready for review, so they're at least willing to entertain adding the support for it. So I think really it's just up to us for naming. So if we can easily say, looks good as proposed, then it goes through, and if we have feedback, then it goes back as needs work. So. They show camel case is the only policy they currently have. And
are we missing Pascal case?
Since the JSON stuff started with properties, I think the assumption was the properties were already named in Pascal case, and you would just not apply a naming policy if you wanted to keep them as is.
But what if they're not?
Yeah, what if you're in Unity?
Yeah, I'm confused by this. If we have camel case, clearly we should have Pascal case, right?
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm just guessing where it came from is that it's assuming that your input name is already Pascal cased, and therefore that you would just not policy it.
Well, I think the problem, originally why they didn't want Pascal case was because the assumption isn't that it's Pascal case. The assumption is that you match ordinal exactly, right? So you don't have to, because the problem with Pascal casing is you have to make the decision where the word boundaries are, right? And that's kind of where all the custom logic from JSON.NET was around, like, oh, what do you do with XML? Do you do XML all uppercase, or do you do lowercase in the middle somewhere? And so I think but I think that's kind of the problem that we have to solve no matter what we do here. So that applies to snake, that applies to camel, that applies to kebab, right? We have to make up our mind.
Well,
right, it's hard. Like, how many translations do you do, right? Like, if you have a thing to camel case, do you assume that you're starting, or to Pascal case, do you assume you're starting in camel case? I guess at least this kebab case can't be done in C#, so that's one less thing you have to worry about transforming from.
Yeah, snake and kebab both give you clear word boundaries when doing a from them to them is, yeah, you're probably not going to notice the lowercase I on iPhone as a word break. Also,
I mean, it depends. I mean,
started
if you
at the
have
beginning.
imagine you have the string SHA-1. Do you want s dash h dash I dash whatever you have, or do you want SHA dash something? Right. That's kind of what JSON.NET has been doing in some cases to make certain words sensible.
Right. I mean, I think on that one, it's you put the JSON name attribute on it and tell it this is how to spell it instead of putting on the class, this class,
Yeah.
you should snake things. So.
Yeah, I'm not sure how big the dictionary is that it has, but it has like, the most commonly handled thing because everybody was tired of doing what you just said because certain words are just really popular or common. I guess JSON XML comes to mind here. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I mean, in terms of like naming of the properties, I'm fine with that. So it really comes down to how does the implementation work, right? I mean, we could also have another one which is basically exact, which basically means we just literally put it in the same way that it is in the .NET type, and that would be not the same as Pascal. And then you use that one if you want perf.
Right, but again, I think that the having no naming policy is exact, which is assuming Pascal.
So the problem with doing it this way is kind of like you have cases where you want a configuration system to give you a policy. And so sometimes you just want to express somehow that you have one, and you could say then you return null to mean exact, but like very often it seems weird to me to have a type that represents a policy, but we can't represent all the policies. Just as a, I don't know, principle, I guess. Because then you have to do these unnatural acts of like null or, I don't know, empty string or whatever it is that you.
Yeah. Since the things we're talking about are an exact policy and a Pascal policy, neither of which are part of the proposal. I think maybe I was wrong at the beginning and we should just skip it. I can't think of any words that we would give them that are useful. I mean, we could say approved, but also consider adding exact in Pascal case as policies, but that feels...
Yeah, that's kind of why I think it would be useful to have the JSON guys here. But I mean, like, the names as they proposed here make sense, given that they come both in upper and lower. I mean, I don't know what else to wish for. So, I mean, it seems reasonable, but then...
Well, clearly snake mixed case of, I want you to add underscores between all my words, but leave the capitalization alone. And snake inverted case, and...
I mean, sure.
All right. I'll just not write anything down. Messes up the video, but who cares?
I think what you're really asking for is shuffle policy.
Take the name, run it through a hash algorithm, turn that back into letters instead of just gibberish, and name it that. Okay. Add instruction encoder.switch to enable emitting switch instructions with label handles. Yeah, that makes total sense to me.
The underlying switch instruction takes a list of labels, which are the jump targets. This makes it easier to generate a switch instruction by directly passing in the list of jump targets that you want the switch to dispatch to.
That makes perfect sense. How did we do it before?
Complexly. You had to like build a bunch of stuff manually. Was not
Is there
nice.
like a byte over? Like, is that the idea that it just here's a byte array of the instructions?
I can speak to what the current how you would use it now. There isn't really a way to do it with the flow control builder that's built in. So when I did it, this is my issue. I ended up just copying the code from control flow builder and adding my own support for switch. You can't use the same label handles because there isn't, as far as I could tell, there was no way to actually emit a switch instruction other than just doing it yourself.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant, because I think originally, so when we worked with the Wasm guys in the early days, they extended the reflection APIs to basically just give us a huge byte array because they wanted to do the encoding themselves. And then later on, they moved to basically this one here. They wrote this one here, the low-level metadata encoder. So I wouldn't be shocked if they just go through a ginormous byte dump anyway. So that's why, yeah, what you say makes sense. I believe that it was never possible. Because it seems kind of as it, if you want to emit switch, you need to know what the labels are, because that's how L works. So if you can't do that, then that seems fundamental. I mean, I don't have any concerns with the proposed API, but you may want to have something that is not taking an array.
There's a proposal added by someone else towards the end. I think that would be the ideal non-allocating version.
Yeah,
I just wanted to. I noticed there was a gap in the API surface, and I just wanted to add like the most minimal proposal possible.
Yeah, I mean, given the domain, I think probably taking a span would be. Do you have any other overloads there? Instruction. What is the thing called? Instruction builder?
Instruction encoder.
Instruction encoder. That's what everything there is called encoders.
I didn't recommend, or I didn't add span as the type, because nothing that I could find in system reflection metadata dealt with spans at all.
Yeah. I think that's probably because they don't really deal with lists of things to begin with. It's all just, you basically call methods, and then they have an internal buffer basically that they fill. But this is an example where you need to provide a list of things. I mean, I guess the most metadata way of doing it would be we would have a switch encoder thingy that gives you a blob for the one instruction, right? But that seems completely over-engineered. At that point, I'd rather have just the switch method that takes a bunch of labels. Which I think the easiest way to do it would be a span.
The switch instruction encoder that builds the one instruction is what the alternative proposal was.
Oh, interesting. So I guess I understand the API then. Yeah, I mean, that works too. I mean, it just seems fairly heavy-handed. But I don't have an objection to that either. I'm not entirely sure how you avoid allocations in that pattern, though.
I mean, I think we really just want param span instead.
I mean, that would be ideal, but that's... I mean, so I'm okay with saying we only have span now, we don't have a params array one, and then later on, if we finally get params for spans, we can just make that happen.
That's not how we've done those types of APIs in the past. We've instead said we expose the array one, and then we'll expose span when C# eventually gets that, because the convenience is worth more.
So in the
Yeah,
in the implementation of switch, where you're taking the params label handles, do you need the handles or just the count?
No, you need the actual. If you look at IL, the way switch works, it literally is an array of the jump targets, and then switch basically, when you invoke it, you basically give it the index into that array that it jumps to.
Okay, I was just looking here at the way that the builder one worked. It says, make a switch and then 3, and then it gives you a thing that goes and does other things, and so it.
Yeah, because basically the builder is pre-allocated for the 3, and so whenever you call branch, you basically fill the internal buffer, right?
Okay.
But I don't understand how the switch instruction encoder could get away with not allocating, because it's just a read-only struct, so it needs to put the best it could do is use a rented pool, but then there's no dispose method, so I don't understand how this would avoid allocations. This would, in my opinion, need to allocate.
Well, it writes to the blob. So as you would invoke branch.
Oh, I see. It actually. Oh, I see. So it just wraps the. I see. Yeah, I guess that would work. Yeah. Never mind then. I mean, that works for me as well. Like, I mean, I don't think that would be horrible. It would slightly change your code, but not by much. It just basically changes where you call, like how you call switch, right? If that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I mean, it's if you're already using instruction encoder, it's nothing new. There's tons of APIs like that.
Yeah.
Similarly small in scope.
Yeah.
So with the simple method that you proposed, it's done with the array once you've finished it? Like you call switch, it params arrays, it writes down some stuff and it's done?
Yeah. So like you would hold on to the labels so you can mark them later, but it doesn't hold on to the array at all.
Because if we're concerned about allocating with a params array during a time that we would just like param span would solve this, we can do what we do in other cases, and we could add overloads of 1 through 8 labels that don't make an array, or 1 through 3 or whatever number we think is appropriate. And if you call it with a small enough number, it doesn't allocate the array, and then we just mark them all as editor browsable never, and they're just invisible, non-allocating versions.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not opposed to that. It's just that the whole metadata reader is not what you would consider a convenient API, right? There's really nothing you can do in 3 lines. Like the most minimal thing is like 20 lines of code, because it's all about giving you basically very low abstraction overhead over the metadata format, and there's just a gazillion things in metadata, right? There's basically the way the reader works, or the writer works both ways, right? The writer has all this encoder thing because it directly writes to the blob. And then on the reader side, it's all based on handles, right? So you get a handle, and then now if you want to do anything with the handle, you have another API that takes the handle that does anything with it, right? So it's all about these interactions. So in that sense, having a convenient API that takes an array isn't really in the spirit of the API, I'd argue. Like a span one would be closer. But then I think what Tomasz had is probably the idiomatic way how the writer is set up today, which is basically it gives you this one, it gives you an encoder, and then you call branch on the encoder. Which isn't bad. I mean, like that's kind of how the whole thing works.
Fair enough. So, you think we should take all of the parts of this that say public?
Pretty much.
If I use the part where this guy actually said what the namespace was.
Yeah, it's all in that namespace.
Alright. Implementation. We don't care. It's a struct, so it always has a default constructor. So that doesn't matter.
Yeah, and that's kind of also metadata reader. Like there's a ton of structs, none of them work in the default. They all just blow up spectacularly when you use them.
That was me looking at it like, oh, an internal constructor, that means it's non-creatable, but it's a struct, so it is.
Yeah, it is.
And then this is partial because we're modifying a thing. That.
Yep, that seems right. And is it really label, or is it label handle? I think it would be label handle, right? I don't think there's a label.
At top it says label handle, and at the bottom it said label. So
I think Tomasz just misremembered when he typed it in.
fair enough. I think he wrote that just from memory.
Probably. I mean,
mean, I guess the easy thing is what does instruction encoder define label do?
Pretty sure it gives you a label handle.
Label.
That's the one. No, that's the wrong one. You're in reflection emit. You need to be on reflection emit metadata, reflection metadata.
Label
That's
handle.
that one. Yeah, that's what I thought.
That may be where the confusion came in.
Yep.
Okay. Why am I writing this in here?
It's only because you like spell checking and a decent editor experience.
Generally, I'm writing notes in there because I'm taking notes while we're talking. But
I
once
see.
we're not talking, then I'll just let people see what notes I'm writing.
Fair enough.
Proposal.
Spell checkers, people that make mistakes. You don't make mistakes. So
I mean, the browser clearly has spell check. All right.
So Patrick, I didn't ask, but like I suppose this will also work for you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It just seems it's more consistent with the API.
All right. Any other feedback? Boom. What time is it? Oh. All right, we're making good progress because we skipped 2 issues.
Skipping is a way to make progress. I agree.
We moved down the list, but we don't actually get anything done. Tanner, is Wasm SIMD APIs something in half an hour?
Depends on how many questions people have. It's basically the same as the surface area we've already exposed, but WASM specific, so it could be fast.
Yeah, things after it look like the JSON crew again, so I guess add support for Wasm SIMD APIs 53730.
So, much like other platforms, Wasm has an official spec around SIMD values, around SIMD support, and it defines a series of APIs to support that. This follows the existing pattern of we have a new namespace, Wasm, that is a sibling to the x86 and the ARM namespace. And then we expose a class called Wasm base, also mirroring the x86 base and ARM base, representing APIs that are part of the baseline of Wasm, Wasm SIMD support. And then we have a series of APIs. So we've got the is supported check, and then a set of APIs following the exact API surface they want to expose. Notably, the constant one should be commented out. That's one we are not going to support. That's supported much as on the other platforms via the Vector 128 create API. Splat is the Wasm specific name for a broadcast, which is that it fills the entire vector with the specified value. Extract lane is their specific name for extracting a specified element from the vector.
I don't have super strong opinions about Splat X, but
Those should be likely be value. The term X and A are the official names they use in the SIMD spec. We have notably fixed those to be
Okay.
value for the other platforms.
does anybody who uses VS Code know how to do rectangular select?
Yes, Shift Alt and then down arrow, up arrow. I think.
Shift Alt. No, that's
Isn't
copying
it
the
just
line.
alt?
Okay, then I don't know. Maybe you have to. Yeah, I think I have Sublime shortcuts. I don't know.
Wait, alt drag for block select by default in VS Code?
Because in VS, where's In VS, if I do hold shift and hit something, alt down, then that's
Yes.
now a square, and I can type in both places. But
This
trying to
is
do
where I
this,
get in trouble.
trying to do the same thing in VS Code is duplicating the line.
Yeah, I think it depends on your keyboard shortcuts. I set up Sublime emulation, and so it's different on my side. But
If-
I mean,
if you-
Alt and mouse drag should still work, no?
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
Alt and mouse drag still works.
Yeah. I wasn't sure because I have the Vim plugin, so I just use Control V. Alt doesn't work, but
I just use Control Shift, right arrow, step pedal, left elbow, and then it just does like, hey.
not gonna lie though, like I get annoyed by it because obviously Control V is overloaded by paste. So there are many times where I hit the wrong thing because like I'm context switching between apps. It's not, panacea.
I feel like Vim is just people invested so much time in it. Now they have to convince themselves that it saves them some time.
Vim is awesome.
Yeah, it's marginal. I like it though. Like every once in a while, there's like a macro where you save yourself a lot of time, and you're like, it was all worth it.
Vim is awesome. All right, I just went back to like old school Control H, replace things that look like a pattern. All right, moving on. So all these A's are now value, and have we been calling immediates im, or are we calling them immediate?
So in this case, we should rename it to index.
Obviously.
Okay.
I should have gone through and fixed up the casing here beforehand, but I guess I forgot to do that.
Yeah, does it even matter for our purposes what is an immediate and what isn't?
It not for what .NET exposes. It's the API where we would theoretically slap a constant expected attribute on there. Now that we have an approved analyzer, but not completed. Just telling people like, if you don't pass in a constant, you might get bad perf.
I see. Yeah, that's I guess fair.
Replace lane is their name for insert. And so it takes the original vector, the index you're inserting into, and the new value.
So
Really?
value index new value.
Let me see what
old
we
value
named.
index new value.
I think we just named it vector for the first one, and then value for the x.
I guess that works too.
The vector 128 with element uses vector and value. SSE41 uses value and data.
Yay for consistency. Which one do you like better, Tanner?
Let me see what we use vector and data for ARM64.
Okay.
I think calling it vector and value or data makes the most sense. I slightly prefer value. I think this is the vector we're inserting into, and then this is the value we're inserting.
Well, that's good because value is what I already wrote.
Yeah. Shuffle the im lane index 3216 should be a vector 128 of s byte and byte. This is a concept where in Wasm you have a different way to specify a 16-byte constant immediate, but for the purposes of .NET we need to take it a vector. But this does a 2-width shuffle API.
Okay, and do we have A and B are?
They're just vector 1, vector 2, left, right, whichever way you want to view it.
Well,
Theoretically,
do we have a pattern for this?
we don't. We've used left, right, we've used vector 1, vector 2. Theoretically, you could view them as a lower upper. As in index 0 is from A, and index 16 is element 0 from B. So you could view it as a lower upper. We've not been consistent here at all. Partially because we've gone with ISA specific conventions where relevant.
And M here is indices?
Yeah, it's
potatoes?
the indices.
Have we been consistent on
We have
XES
been
versus CES?
I believe we've been consistent on CES.
Okay. Swizzle.
Yeah, so swizzle is a shuffle that takes in one a vector. So that's A is just the vector and S is the indices again.
Okay.
And then we get to some easier to explain ones where it's just left and right. So add, subtract, multiply. Integer dot product, taking two shorts and returning an int. Negate.
Sorry, I'm renaming things as we go.
Yep, that's fine.
Alright, so B becomes right. Okay, dot is left and right.
Yep, left and right again.
Negate, I assume, is value. Or is it vector?
We value.
You mind typing on the monitor for everybody so we can actually see what you're doing? Better absolutely get along. Yeah.
Alright, multiply, widening, lower.
Yeah, so this follows the multiply, widening, lower, follows the same naming convention we used for ARM. There's actually an equivalent API with the same name there. Same with add pairwise widening.
Yeah, but what are A and B?
Left and right.
This is how the caveman edits his API.
I don't know how to get it to do only replace
I know,
in...
I'm just,
yeah.
it's all fine.
This is what I get for only using VS Code during this meeting. I never learn it. And VS
Sounds
is
like
too
a you
heavy.
problem.
Yep. Alright. Add saturate. Sounds like left and right to me.
And same
Pair
with
was widening,
subtract.
we just left it at A, not value.
Well, at one point I did find all space A commas and replace them with value because at the beginning that looked sane. And then it wasn't. So it says A in the proposal and value on my screen.
I'm confused now. So you're saying you're not fixing it in your editor because it's already correct in the proposal?
No, in add pairwise widening.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, sorry, I missed this group. Yeah, so
Okay. That should be value presumably, right? Because it's a single one.
I assume so. Tanner,
Sorry, which one?
add pairwise
Add
widening.
pairwise
It only takes
widening.
one thing.
Yeah, that's just value. So it adds pairs. That is side by side values. So 0 and 1 get added together and then widened to the short result. Then 2 and 3, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, etc. So multiply, rounded, saturate, Q15. So multiply, rounded, saturate, it matches the naming convention we picked for ARM64. It is left and right. The Q15 is because Wasm has a concept of a 15.1 fixed precision number format, and this fits that. It's important for JavaScript and Wasm scenarios, so Q15 at the end just to indicate that is the format under which it's operating.
Fair enough. Isn't that also like our Fox channel here?
I don't know. I don't watch Fox.
Fair enough. I just feel like we have like a Q15 or Q14. All right. Men are left and right.
Yes. We notably they're not left and right in a traditional sense, but like as if you were to see a plus operator, but they are the left and right parameters, and there's not really a better name other than value 1, value 2. So.
Well, I mean, in other ISAs, have we called them left and right, or value 1 and value 2, or are we
left and right, except for math, where we called them value 1 and value 2?
That's fair. But in the ISAs, we've called them left and right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thinking of max as an infix operator is kind of odd, but I guess that works.
Which one's odd?
I said
Sorry?
min and max as an infix operator is kind of odd, but if we already done that, then that's what we do.
Sorry, what do you mean by infix here?
So normally when you have like left and right as a naming convention for a method, you kind of tend to think of the method as an infix operator, like, plus, minus.
Right.
So that's why I'm saying it's a bit weird for min, but
yeah, we'll just smiley face emoji is now the new symbol for max, and frowny face emoji is the symbol for min, and so you have like 5 frowny face 2 in that evaluates to 2.
Obviously.
Yeah.
This is why we're happy that you're not designing languages.
Yeah, so average rounded would be left and right again. It computes the average of the numbers, rounding it, rather than truncating. Abs would be value, same name that we use for absolute everywhere else.
Apparently it's going to be a while before you... There we go.
Yeah. So shift left, shift right arithmetic, and shift right logical. Y should be count, is the name we've used elsewhere.
But these are actually value now.
Well, the first one is
Yeah,
The first,
those are
it's,
actual.
yeah. So it's value
it's
and
value
count.
and count.
That I think makes sense.
It's interesting that we can see it going line by line effectively.
That's what single replace does.
Oh, you were doing single replace. I thought you were doing a replace all, and it was just really slow.
No, because if I knew how to make it be only in the highlighted area replace all, then I would hit replace all, but I don't, so I hit 1.
And then left and right for and, or, XOR.
I honestly think that's what one of the buttons in the top right does, right next to the X. Oh, on the far right. It's in the middle, I think. Find in selection, yeah, that's what it does. So if you make it in the selection and then you say whoop. Or I think you. But then I don't know.
It appears to be the break things button.
Yes. Never mind then. Let's go back to the caveman way, at least that works. Brute force.
you're watching this on YouTube right now, this is why things at Microsoft cost a lot of money, because we have 3 people to edit one document. That's how that goes.
Yep.
We could just say Tanner should edit it and fix it up after review.
No, that's not how we run. We like our paperwork to be pristine when we hit approve.
Yeah.
Both
Emo and I grew up in Germany. Paperwork will be correct.
Not is of course value, and not would be left, right.
No. And not will be left and right.
Yes. And then bitwise select is I actually need to double check which order it is, but one is left right, or 2 of them are left right, and the other one is the condition.
All right, hold on. I have a suggestion from chat. First select, then push find in selection, then push match all.
Seems to have worked.
All right, thank you. Let's see your Greek. Frederick? F-O-D... Yeah, it might be Frederick. Thank you, chat. Okay, bitwise select.
Yeah, so C is select, and then A is left, B is right.
Clear selection, that, bind in selection. Alright, so left, right, and select?
Yep.
Okay.
It's fun that all 3 platforms can't agree on the order of these 3 parameters for bitwise select. They all do something different. Any true is just value.
Pop count is value.
Any true is value, as is all true. It just does a
TH, not an F. Alright. Sorry.
These just report are any of the values equivalent to any bit set versus are all non-zero.
Right, so
it's the standard Boolean
not
condition.
0 and 1. Yeah.
Right, rather than the other concept that Vector sometimes uses, which is all bit set in 0. Yeah, bitmask just extracts the most significant bit from each element. It's basically equivalent to extract most significant bits in our shared public API surface.
That went somewhere weird. Okay. Compare equal, not equal, less than or equal, greater than or equal are all left and right.
Yep.
And Alt A doesn't work because VS Code. They really seem to think people use their mouse.
No, you just hit the wrong shortcuts. I never use my mouse.
Fair enough. Well, the default shortcuts seem to be clearly you're using your mouse. Okay. Load vector 128. I assume memarg is not what we call things.
Address.
Address. C.
I assume all of these memargs are going to be address.
Yes.
An entire document, right?
Hey, I get to do a whole document replace, and it actually worked.
So we've got load, vector 128, load scalar, vector 128. We have load scalar and splat vector 128. So this loads a single byte or single element from the address and then splats it. It's somewhat equivalent to, but not quite the same as vector 128 create, when you pass in a single value that happens to be a memory address. The JIT actually recognizes that and will optimize it down to this instruction.
When you say splatted, what does it actually mean? It just replicates the value?
Yeah, it's replicate, broadcast. Every platform disagrees on the term to use. For this one, we have the value vector for x, because we are loading a single element and inserting it into the destination index of the vector.
And
That would be index.
do we call that index
Yeah,
or destination index?
I think it's just index. I don't think we have to differentiate there.
Because I would have assumed index, but then you said destination index, so that made me.
Yeah. Load widening vector will read, for example, a vector 128 of s byte and then upcast it to short, etc. Store, we used the term. We've actually consistently used the term source rather than data or value for store.
So data is store?
No, source.
Source.
Yeah. And then store selected scalar would be source and index.
Much faster. Thank you again, Theodore.
Well, it just.
Yeah, when you cancel the match in thing, if it finds a match somewhere in the document, it jumps. So something else was named im.
Yeah. Negate and abs again, but this time for floating point, both value, min, max, for floating point. Again,
which were
left and right. Yeah, so the pseudo min and pseudo max, that's the official names they use for Wasm. It is a simple min and max. So it functionally does right is less than a, return right colon a. So it's a simple comparison, not taking into account nans, -0, or any of the other special floating point considerations.
All right, and add, subtract, divide, and multiply are left and right.
Yep. Ceiling for truncate and square root are all just value.
Round to nearest, is that left and right?
That one should actually just be value, and there shouldn't be a B. That looks like a copy paste error.
I thought I had a selection. Okay, delete B.
Yeah. The converts all just take value. Again, the saturate follows the convention we decided on for ARM. As does the narrowing saturate there, which is lower upper.
Damn it, code editor. Control H, only in my selection. Don't drag words out. That should not have been a feature. Okay, lower. And upper. Sign extend, widening, lower, and upper, then zero extend, widening, lower, and upper, and these are all
Should all value.
okay.
And then that's the entire surface area, as spec'd by Wasm and as now implemented by Chrome, Edge, and a few others. And notably for .NET 7, notably for .NET 7, Wasm has done, and Mono have done some light up for the XPlat APIs, and they've gotten a PR up which has some of the surface area as an internal only implementation detail, while we're waiting for it to be approved.
Okay, and all these extend widenings, those were value, not vector? So value is the word I should replace these with. I go with yes. I think Tanner has a kid at the mic.
Sorry, our one of our cars is being towed because it refuses to start, and so the wife is dealing with that.
It's better than usually is being towed. Sounds not like a voluntary action.
Yeah, no, this one was voluntary, so we could get it fixed. It's a like 12-year-old car now, so.
Fair enough. So the extend widening, those are value, not vector, right?
Right.
Okay.
We've typically only used vector when it's being referred to as when we need to differentiate it from another value.
Like when you have an index that's like 0, 1, 2, or 3 into it.
Yeah.
Basically.
Correct.
Okay, so the note that I put for constant is that it's just cut because it lives somewhere else. And that's
Right.
correct?
Yeah. This is functionally what this is functionally doing is it was it does the exact same thing that vector 128 create does, but in particular this one only supported the concept of create passing in 16 individual byte-wise values, and then doing .as to the correct key, which isn't that useful in practice. And there's no reason for us to expose this concept when none of the other ISAs do, and people should exclusively use the create APIs anyways.
Fair enough. Okay, and then it just is a little weird, so bear with the question. Is this the only ISA we have that only has a base?
Yes.
Okay. Because it feels slightly weird, but the only workaround that I feel for that is we would have system runtime intrinsics Wasm, and that may or may not even be disallowed by the compiler.
Yeah, we could call it Wasm sim. So something we could do is we could call this Wasm SimD. There's not an official name for the extension. It's the technically it's the packed SimD extension is the term they've used in other places, but unlike the hardware specs where there is a something like advanced SimD or SSE, there's not a kind of marketing name for this. If we called it just SimD, that's potentially confusing and conflicting with other things, which is different from advanced SimD where nothing else is likely to be named that. Calling it Wasm SIMD would differentiate and would then allow the base class to be used for theoretical future where we wanted to expose non-extension instructions.
This is supported, I assume, should be static.
Yes. Yes.
And the does every Wasm environment support this? So is this supported the same as Am I Wasm right now, or is this more complicated?
It's more complicated. It is a it's not part of the baseline Wasm specification. Every major browser that supports Wasm currently has some support for Wasm SIMD, generally full support at this point. But that's not necessarily going to be the case on any browser you encounter, which might be another reason to just call it Wasm SIMD rather than Wasm base.
Or Wasm packed SIMD, and make an empty Wasm base that it extends just for consistency.
We can define the Wasm base in the future when it's needed.
That's true.
Yeah, so I'd say Wasm SIMD or packed SIMD would be fine. I expect nothing's going to conflict with packed SIMD.
Have we spelled SIMD previously?
Capital S, lowercase IMD.
Okay. Yes, the all caps or one cap was really the question.
Yeah, we followed the normal convention for .NET spelling for these.
Okay. And the other question I was going to ask is, do any of our base ISAs have and is supported on the base?
Yes, because we want to differentiate. For example, we want ARM64 to say false for x86 base is supported.
That's fair. So our convention on that has been every layer just says public static new bool is supported?
Correct.
Okay.
And the inheritance hierarchy, so a derived types is supported implies the parents, the base types is supported.
Right.
Nested classes is supported infers that the containing types is supported is true as well as any other base. So it's a kind of multi-inheritance type thing, if you conceptualize.
Yeah, by convention, because nothing in such a structure outside of this space would be able to guarantee.
Right.
Right. We went through all the parameter names in the meeting and made them as consistent as possible. Okay, and I think that's really all we did was talk about some parameter names, because all of the method names aside from Q13 is our Fox station. My brain says. So Q15 is the only weird one, and I don't think any of us care. So.
Yeah. The one thing that I would say is if we're going to prefix it with Wasm, I think just Wasm SIMD is fine. All SIMD is technically packed SIMD of a sort, or just packed SIMD and not including the Wasm prefix, I think would be fine. Not super strong about it.
Oh, right, because that would be system runtime intrinsics.wasm.packed SIMD is supported.
Yeah, I think just packed SIMD would be kind of clear there.
Okay. But you said that there's a spec somewhere that calls it packed SIMD.
Yeah.
So
WebAssembly 128-bit hacked SIMD extension. And WebAssembly is one word.
Fair enough. All right.
And ta-da.
Lunchtime?
Yep. Notably, in the future, I've got some proposals up for Vector 512 and AVX 512F, which is the small subset of the overall AVX 512 surface area. But we're going to have more SIMD fun for .NET 8 in total.
Well, may I humbly request that you do all the variable renames before the meeting?
Yeah. Yes. I've already done that for the AVX 512 one. I apparently just forgot for the Wasm one because it's been sitting around for a while.
Fair
But
enough.
make sure to record it on video so we can upload it to YouTube for other people to see how the rename is going.
Yeah, well, and without that, how would the internet have known that I looked at a theta and was like, obviously that's a fee, so I can just be like, yeah, that says Frederick when it says Theodore. So I read Greek good. All right, I should actually push approved on that. And it's no longer a suggestion because those labels are mutually exclusive. All right. Well, we have cleared the red and no more. Okay, more red popped up and then we cleared that, but no new more red has popped up during the meeting. So, with that, it is now lunchtime in Redmond and, dinner or drinks time in many other places. And with that, I think we'll see you next week. Same .NET time, same .NET channel.